Welcome to the Love Story with Lisa channel. Today, we're bringing you a brand new story. They abandoned me when I was little, then came back for fame and profit. But now I already have a family of my own. Introduction: my grandma raised me all by herself. When I was admitted to a 985 university, my parents suddenly appeared again, fighting over the right to take me back. What they didn't know was this: when my grandma passed away, she had only 50 yuan on her, money she had carefully saved, coin by coin. Before she died, she told me to use it to buy a little more meat so I could eat well. She passed away in that old house, with no one there to care for her until the very end. Now, let me tell you the story. I don't know if any of you have ever seen winter in the northwestern countryside. Earthen walls, mud houses, a heated brick bed, everything was made from yellow earth. Even the cold wind seemed to carry dust. The reason for all of this seems simple enough. I was a girl. My father, Victor Lin, believed deeply in valuing sons over daughters. Because of that, my mother, Linda Zhao, insisted on divorce. And in the end, they really did divorce. But neither of them wanted to raise me. My grandfather, Arthur Lin, had already passed away years earlier. Back in the village, the only one left was my grandmother. So my grandma Lin, Margaret Lin, took me in. When she came to pick me up, she was overjoyed. She was the only person in the world who wanted me. Many people later said that I had only been 4 years old back then. Surely I wouldn't remember anything. Even years later, when people asked me, "Do you still remember what your parents looked like?" I would always answer carefully, "I don't remember." But the truth was, I remembered very clearly. I even remembered what the bus driver looked like on the day my father brought me back to the village. When I was little, I cried easily. But strangely, that day, I didn't cry. My father didn't ask me anything either. Perhaps he could tell that I already understood what was happening. The bus stopped at the top of a hill. Grandma's house was at the foot of the mountain. At first, my father planned to take me down the hill himself. But unexpectedly, my grandma had already been waiting at the entrance of the road. She had been there for a long time. The day before, my father had called the small grocery store in the village to tell them he would bring me back. I didn't know how long she had waited. All I knew was that the sky was gloomy that day, and snow was drifting down. When she reached out to take me into her arms, her hands were frozen stiff, bluish with cold. "So, you've really come." That was my first impression of her. Before that, she had only come to the city once. Back when I was still a baby drinking milk, she came to help my parents take care of me. After I started kindergarten, I never saw her again. That day, I looked at her carefully. Living in the countryside all year long, exposed to wind and sun, her face had been badly weathered. Her skin was rough, a reddish-purple color. Dust clung to the deep wrinkles across her face. My mother, on the other hand, had fair and smooth skin. Later, she found herself a young and wealthy man. They had a son together and built a brand new family. But what about me? I never even got the chance to ask her that question. By the time I thought of asking, she already had her new family. Go Wa. Go Wa. In our place, old people often use this phrase to call a child they loved dearly. Are you hungry? Are you cold? Tonight Grandma will make dumplings for you. Grandma was very small. Even when she stood up straight, she didn't reach my father's shoulder. When my father saw that she had come to take me, he didn't say another word. He turned around and got back on the bus. He wanted to catch the return trip to the city as soon as possible. He didn't want to spend even a single extra day staying with me. At that moment, Grandma glanced at him and asked softly, "Won't you stay a few days? Will you come back for the new year?" My father sat by the bus window and pulled out his phone. He was always busy like that, in my limited childhood memories. Whenever he was with me, he was always holding that small phone, texting someone. He didn't even look up at us. He only replied casually, "We'll see." After that, over the next dozen years, he returned to the village only 5 times. The wind howled and snow drifted through the air. The bus carrying my father gradually disappeared into the distance. Grandma picked me up and started walking down the mountain. Layer upon layer of mountains stretched endlessly. Terraced fields were covered with thick white snow. The view extended so far that you couldn't see where it ended. Later in life, I would have to spend tremendous effort just to escape those deep mountains. Grandma was thin, but her hands were large and strong. That year, she had just turned 60. The snow made the road extremely slippery. I knew walking wasn't easy for her, so I told her to put me down. I held her hand. The two of us walked home together. Along the way, we met many villagers. Grandma happily introduced me to everyone. "This is my granddaughter. Look how adorable she is." It seemed that she had truly been waiting for the days when we could live together. It felt as though, from the very beginning, she loved me deeply. Very, very deeply. Grandma sent me to the village elementary school. She ignored the advice from the uncles in the village who told her to keep me at home helping with work and marry early someday. She wanted me to study properly. The conditions in the countryside were poor. The entire school had only 5 teachers. The same teacher often taught both math and Chinese. There was one teacher surnamed Yang. Her name was Ms. Daisy Yang. Technically, she was related to me, something like my second cousin-in-law. But I preferred to call her Ms. Yang. There was something about her that reminded me of my mother. Ms. Yang had graduated from high school, but for some reason she never went to college. Instead, she married early and had children. She had a son and a daughter, both around my age. Sometimes when she cooked, she would call me over to eat with them. She told me that elementary school students in the cities had already started learning English. I had learned a little English in kindergarten before. I even knew how to sing the alphabet song. So Ms. Yang wanted me to start learning early. She was worried that if I only began learning English in middle school, it would be very difficult for me to keep up. Ms. Daisy Yang took out a notebook. It was her English notebook from high school. She told me that every day, she would teach me a little. If we kept it up like that, by the time I reached 6th grade, I might even be able to help her teach the other students English. I hugged that notebook and carried it home. It was the most precious gift I had ever received. Grandma Lin noticed that right away. At home, there was a sack that she treasured greatly, but she still took one apart to make a protective cover for my notebook. Grandma had been born in the old era. She couldn't read a single word. She once told me that when she was little, she had actually had the chance to go to school, but she only attended 2 classes. She couldn't concentrate, because she kept worrying about the sewing work waiting unfinished at home. She felt restless and uneasy sitting in class, and so, she never studied again. Her entire life had been spent trapped in that tiny village. Even though she was a woman, she could raise all the livestock, control 2 mules to plow the fields, repair roads during heavy rain, and even lay bricks when people built new houses. Grandma seemed to have been born industrious, as if she had come into the world already knowing how to do everything. "Evelyn, you don't need to worry about anything. Now," she told me, "Grandma will work hard. All you need to do is study well. Don't think about anything else." As she spoke, she was sewing a cotton-padded jacket for me to wear during the winter. Every now and then she would also check anxiously to make sure the stove heater was working properly. Our little house was old, but it was always clean and tidy. Before dawn each day, she had already fetched water, swept the yard, and baked bread. Out of the 3 flatbreads she made, she would cut one open and spread a thin layer of lard over the steaming white interior. That was the food she packed. for me to take to school. The jar that held the lard was the most beautiful porcelain jar in the house. Grandma wrapped it carefully and kept it inside the cabinet. Except when she took it out to make food for me, she never used it again. My elementary school years were actually very comfortable. I was still small, and Grandma couldn't bear to let me do heavy work. At that time, her health was still very good. She even learned how to ride a bicycle. Sometimes she would take me with her to the town. She sold the grains we grew at home. After buying the daily necessities we needed, she would always buy a few pieces of candy for me. Going to the market in town was the happiest time for me. The shops and stalls displayed all kinds of goods. On market days, the crowds were so thick that there was barely any room to stand. It was incredibly lively. I especially liked leaning against the entrance of the grocery store, just watching everything. Sometimes I would run into my elementary school classmates there. They were brought by their parents. If they wanted something, they simply picked it up and bought it. I would watch them quietly. Sometimes I felt a little jealous. Even though our village was poor and small, growing up with parents must have been very happy. Just as I was lost in those thoughts, a big hand gently touched the back of my head. "Evelyn, do you want to eat something? Come on, Grandma has money. I'll buy it for you." It seemed that Grandma could always see the sadness hidden in my heart, and she always understood the way I was growing up. I glanced over all the snacks in the shop, as if I had already eaten them. I couldn't bear to spend her money, so I looked up and told her, "I don't want anything." But she ignored what I said. She took one of everything the children liked the most, from spicy sticks to chewing gum, and handed them to me. "I bought these so you can try them. If you like something, next time we'll buy a few more." She stuffed several pieces of spicy sticks into my mouth. As for herself, she only licked the chili oil left on her fingers. Only much later did I understand something. Adults also crave snacks. They also want to eat those delicious things. But they don't say it out loud. Sometimes they even lie. "It's too spicy, Evelyn. Grandma really doesn't like spicy sticks. You eat all of these, okay? Don't leave any behind." "Grandma, why was it that snacks, fried meat, and soft white bread, you always said you didn't like them? Grandma, why was there always only a piece of dried bread I had already bitten inside your pocket?" If I had really asked those questions back then, she would certainly have just smiled, and continued telling those gentle little lies. Her love was as deep as these mountains, as vast as the star-filled sky above them. She was born so great, perhaps just so that I could call her Grandma. What I never expected was that when I was in 3rd grade, Grandma opened a small grocery shop in the village. Villagers came and went constantly. Of course, it wasn't a formal shop. She simply cleaned out the front room of our house and set up a shelf using a long wooden plank. At first, business wasn't very good. But Grandma was very clever. She took advantage of the time. When students were leaving school, she would carry a basket full of snacks on her back and sell them at the school gate. Little by little, she started earning money. Every so often, she would ride her bicycle down to town to restock. Whenever she did, I would help her push the bicycle up the mountain. We would keep pushing until we reached the main road. When we met my friends along the way, I would proudly tell them, "My grandma is going to buy goods. If there's something you like to eat, just tell my grandma." Grandma opened the shop for a very simple reason. While setting up the wooden plank shelf, she laughed and said to me, "If I hadn't asked about the wholesale prices, I would never have known snacks made so much profit. One pack of spicy sticks can earn a few coins. So why not open a shop? Then you can have snacks every day." She didn't know that besides the joy of being able to eat snacks whenever I wanted, something else made me even happier. Having a grocery shop at home, and seeing the jealous looks from my classmates, made me feel proud. Before that, I often felt inferior and sad because I didn't have my parents by my side. But sharing fruit candies with my classmates, even the small kind that cost only 2 pieces for 1 coin, and receiving their thanks and kindness, those moments could make me happy for a very long time. In our village, if a family had a snack shop, it was truly something impressive. Among the children back then, it meant you were someone special. Soon, people from many villages within miles had heard about my grandma. Everyone praised her. They said she was a tiny old woman, yet far from ordinary. Even though her hair had already turned completely white, she could still ride a bicycle to pick up goods and run her little stall all by herself. With only one granddaughter by her side, she still tried her best to live well. At that time, her tiny grocery shop became my greatest pride, and she herself became the strongest support in my life. Grandma was extremely frugal and very good at saving money. The profit from the grocery shop was tiny, calculated coin by coin, just a few cents at a time. But over the course of a year, she could still manage to save more than 1,000 yuan. That year, during the Spring Festival, she brought me to a clothing store in town for the first time. She said she wanted to buy me a new outfit so I could celebrate the new year happily. As I looked at the beautiful clothes, things I had only ever seen on television before, I cautiously asked her, "But what about the cloth you bought earlier? Wouldn't that be a waste of money? Maybe we shouldn't buy anything after all, Grandma." She smiled, picked up a pink cotton jacket, and held it up against me. "I'll use that cloth to sew a cotton vest for myself," she said. "With the leftover pieces, I can make a pair of shoes." I was still hesitating. While trying on the jacket, I stuffed my hands deep into the pockets and refused to take them out. Grandma crouched down and looked up at me. "Didn't my little pup say she doesn't like pink? Grandma will pick another one." I saw it clearly. While she turned away to change the jacket for another one, she secretly wiped the tears from her eyes. Her back always looked so thin that I was afraid. Even spending 1 more yuan of her money might bend that strong, straight back of hers, because I had been abandoned by my own parents. I always thought of myself as a burden, especially when facing the grandmother who had taken me in without any conditions. I was even more afraid of troubling her. In the end, under her firm insistence, Grandma bought me a sky blue cotton jacket. I was afraid I would grow too quickly, so I deliberately asked the shop assistant to give me a size meant for someone 1.6 meters tall. When I put it on, I looked like I was wearing a huge sack, but I thought that at least it could last 10 years. I understood how hard life was for her, and she loved me because I tried to be understanding. During those years, we relied on this kind of love, always thinking of each other first. As we made it through freezing winters and scorching summers together, facing the earth, backs turned to the sky, during the hottest days of July and August, when summer vacation came, I finally had time to help her pull wheat in the fields. But Grandma couldn't bear to let me work in the fields. At first, she always tried to chase me back home. She told me to read books and finish my homework, at most. She would let me help knead dough, cut noodles, and wait for her to come home to cook. But only a few days after the vacation started, I had already finished all my homework, every day. All I needed to do was memorize a few vocabulary words assigned by Ms. Daisy Young. The truth was, I had deliberately finished everything early so I could help Grandma work. So every day, as soon as she left the house, would secretly follow behind her. Then I would circle around to the other side of the wheat field and quietly start pulling wheat. Our region was quite underdeveloped. Even much later, people still pulled wheat by hand. We didn't have gloves at home, after pulling wheat. For just a few hours, the little finger on my right hand hurt as if it had been cut off. After we finished work late at night, under the moonlight, Grandma would gently rub oil onto my hands. It was the cheapest face cream we could buy. The texture was like a thin version of Vaseline. A large jar cost only 10 yuan, which meant each small portion cost less than 50 cents. I was afraid of wasting it, so I told her, "Grandma, just use a little." She looked at me for a long, long time. Then all that remained were her long, endless sighs. I knew she was blaming herself again, so I quickly said, "Grandma, in a few days the melon sellers will come. Let's buy some watermelons, okay? I really love watermelon." In those years, farmers often drove three-wheeled carts loaded with watermelons into the village to sell them. On clear summer nights, Grandma and I would sit on a pile of straw, eating watermelon while counting the stars. I would point out the Big Dipper to her. Grandma would laugh until her eyes nearly disappeared. "Oh my! There are so many stars. How could I possibly see which ones make the Big Dipper?" Later, when I left those deep mountains and went to a big city filled with skyscrapers, I never saw a night sky full of glittering stars like that again. Those dense clusters of stars hanging above our heads like a bowl, they truly made people feel humble. My favorite watermelons were the ones that were cheaper than vegetables. They were the only fruit that Grandma and I could eat freely without feeling guilty. Most importantly, whenever we bought watermelon, Grandma would also hold a small half in her arms and scoop out bites with a big spoon. It was different from the lard, different from the salted meat, different from the dumplings on New Year's Eve, those things she always claimed she didn't like, leaving them all for me to eat. Because of the watermelons, I finally had an excuse to go to the fields with her to pull wheat. Grandma even bought me a new pair of gloves. She was truly a very clever woman. She bought 2 pairs wholesale. She gave 1 pair to me and sold the other. Not only did she recover the cost, she even made a few extra yuan. With that money, she bought cotton and fabric. Then she personally sewed 2 knee pads for me, so I could wear them while kneeling to pull wheat. I kept those knee pads for many years. Even after I got married and had children, they were still placed beside my bed. Many years later, when I had already become a grandmother myself, every time I touched the tiny stitches on those knee pads, it felt as though I could still feel Grandma's warmth, the warmth from her calloused, rough, stiff fingers. The warmth from those small yet powerful hands that sheltered me and allowed me to grow up beneath a clear and open sky. 3.5 years after abandoning me, my father, Victor Lin, finally returned to the village once. This time, he came with a woman I had never seen before. The woman's surname was Chen. She looked a little like my mother, Linda Zhao. Many years later, I finally realized something. My father, Victor Lin, was truly despicable. Miss Chen treated me politely enough, but perhaps because she thought I looked dirty, she hesitated. At first, she seemed about to take my hand, but in the end, she pulled her hand back and only said a few polite words. My father gently stroked my head and told me kindly, "Call Aunt Shen a mom." Just then, Grandma Lin had finished working in the fields and walked over. She immediately brushed his hand away and said angrily, "Don't say things like that to Evelyn." I understood exactly what was happening, but I pretended not to know anything. I simply didn't want to face that situation. My father looked a little embarrassed at last. He tried to change the subject and asked, "Evelyn, do you remember Dad?" Those words made the bridge of my nose sting. Even though my parents hadn't loved me very much, during the first year after I returned to Grandma's house, I still couldn't stop myself from missing them. At that time, I was only 6 years old. At that innocent age, I didn't understand gain or loss. I trusted them completely. I depended on them like a loyal little puppy. But at the moment when I loved them the most, they abandoned me. In the bright future they imagined for themselves, I had never been included. Just like when someone abandons a puppy, they don't feel much pain about it. So I thought about it for a long time. Even though it was already early autumn and still warm, my hands and feet felt icy cold, numb with chill. I looked up at my father and simply said, "Dad, you've gotten thinner. Thinner than the last time I saw you." The last time I saw you was 3 years ago. Do you remember? At last, a hint of guilt appeared on his face. At that moment, I really wanted to ask him something. If I called this Miss Chen a mom, would he take me back home? It wasn't because I wanted to go with him. I just wanted to know whether he still considered me his biological daughter. But I didn't ask. That day, I obediently poured water and cooked a meal for them. I didn't say another word, because I already knew the answer. Grandma didn't speak much to them either. When my father said he wanted to marry Miss Chen, Grandma simply replied, "That's your decision." When he said they planned to have a son to carry on the family line, she said, "Evelyn is a good child. She can also take care of a family." Only when my father was about to leave, and left behind 2,000 yuan, did Grandma speak up. She said, "I'll keep this money. It's not because I'm greedy. It's for Evelyn's future university education. That's money a father should provide for his daughter. I won't spend a single cent of it." She was just a thin, tiny old woman, but the pride and dignity in her voice stood tall like an ancient tree. Many years later, I often thought about it. It was Grandma, a rural woman who couldn't even read, who taught me how to be optimistic, strong, and unyielding. The lessons from her actions and words were no less powerful than the great philosophies written in famous books. My father left at dusk, just like 3 years earlier. He refused to stay even a single night. Miss Chen was dressed very elegantly. Naturally, she didn't want to stay in a place like this either. I had already decided that if my parents had chosen not to want me, then I would treat them like strangers. But when I watched my father's figure disappear into the distance, I still felt so sad that tears streamed down my face. Once again, I had been abandoned by my father, afraid that Grandma would feel upset. I carried an armful of firewood and hid behind the woodpile to cry. I still vaguely remembered some things from my early childhood. When I was in kindergarten, once I had made my mother angry and was scolded. I hid behind the sofa, squatting on the floor, secretly wiping my tears. It was my father who found me first. He held a piece of candy in his hand, just like now, when Grandma held a handful of candy, found me, and stuffed them into my pockets. She hugged me tightly. Her voice was low and gentle as she comforted me. It sounded like Buddhist scriptures, the kind a lost person might hear while kneeling before a Buddha statue, clear and sacred, enough to warm Evelyn's heart. "Evelyn, tonight Grandma will make dumplings for you." Grandma didn't know how to say witty things. She didn't know how to use beautiful, elegant words. Instead, she poured her deep love into the simplest sentences. "Evelyn, Grandma will cook something delicious for you. Evelyn, Grandma will sew you a cotton jacket. Evelyn, it's snowing so heavily, let Grandma take you to school." Later, when I studied the line, Mother knocked on the door and asked if I was cold or hungry. The only image in my mind was Grandma's face, wrinkled with a warm smile, darkened by years under the sun. Sometimes she was sweeping the yard, sometimes carrying a bundle of firewood, sometimes holding a basket filled with wild grass. She always kept her promises. That night, she really did make dumplings. My favorite dish. In our village, making dumplings was complicated and required many ingredients. The meat filling alone could make more than 10 bowls of noodles for the two of us. Meat was precious, so Grandma only made dumplings for me during Spring Festival and the Mid-Autumn Festival. She said they symbolized reunion and good health. Smoke slowly rose from the kitchen stove. The sunset outlined the distant mountains. I sniffled as I helped her start the fire. She teased me with a Laugh, don't wrap the dumplings yourself later. I'm afraid you'll wrap your runny nose inside them. Her words made me burst out laughing. The aching pain in my chest disappeared instantly. Then she said gently, "If your father stayed tonight, this dumpling meal would be a family reunion dinner." At that moment, I suddenly realized something. He was my father, but he was also her son. Perhaps the absence of a father, and the absence of a son, were both equally painful. My grandma also needed comfort, so I said firmly, "Grandma, the two of us together also count as a reunion. It's fine if only the two of us eat. If Dad can't have this delicious meal, that's because he doesn't have the good fortune for it." Grandma laughed along with me. The last ray of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, and a deep blue night slowly descended. "Grandma," I said softly, "Evelyn has grown up now. I'll help you support this family." By the time I was in 5th grade, I could already manage the grocery shop by myself. By then, Grandma's shop had begun selling cigarettes, alcohol, and snacks. The uncles in the village often came to buy things. I was very quick at calculating the money. After school, I would sit inside the grocery shop, studying while selling goods. Every day I kept an eye on the time, waiting for Grandma to return from the fields. Just before she came home, I would close the shop and go start the fire to cook dinner. The neighbors often praised me, saying I was a good child. They would say that Grandma was old now, and that I should help her with more work. Only Grandma would immediately frown and scold them. "My good child needs to focus on her studies. Don't teach her to go work in the fields." Sometimes I was truly surprised by her determination to make me study. She had clearly never left these deep mountains. She had probably never even heard phrases like "education can change your destiny." What she heard most in her life were probably words like, "Girls should marry early. There's no need for them to study too much." But she insisted, with all her heart, that I must study. She wanted me to enter university. She wanted me to return to the big city. She once told me, "A person must strive on their own. You were originally a city child. You've already suffered enough living here in the countryside. If you want to step out into the world again, you'll have to rely on yourself." Hearing those words, I couldn't suppress the bitterness rising in my heart. Back then, Grandma had worked just as hard to raise my father, Victor Lin, and help him become a university student. She must have had the same hopes for him. No one is born knowing how to be a parent. But when it came to raising children, Grandma always carried a sense of guilt in her heart. Perhaps because of that guilt, she did far better than many other parents. I was admitted directly into middle school, so my 6th grade year was relatively relaxed. I even had time to help Ms. Daisy Young teach English to the younger students. Ms. Young had been deeply hurt by the belief in her family that girls should study less and marry early. Whenever she taught me English, she couldn't help but feel regret. When she was in high school, she had been an excellent student. Everyone else's English was poor, but hers was very good. If she had been able to take the university entrance exam, she might even have been admitted to Peking University. I had heard some rumors. Back then, in order to force her to give up studying and return home, her mother had even threatened suicide. Her family had arranged what they believed to be a good marriage for her. The man only had an elementary school education, but his family owned many cattle and sheep and was considered relatively wealthy. Children in rural areas were usually very simple and deeply attached to their families. Especially girls. Their feelings toward their mothers were both dependence and compassion. They knew how much suffering their mothers had endured under the old, feudal society. They knew that until the very end, their mothers had worked tirelessly for the family. Meanwhile, Ms. Yang's father had been so cold that he even threatened to drive her mother out of the house in order to force her to bring Ms. Yang back home. Clearly, The conflict was not between mother and daughter, yet in the end, all the suffering fell on their shoulders. So Ms. Yang gave in, despite the strong opposition of her high school teachers. She still chose to return home and get married. In some ways, she resembled my Grandma Lin. She constantly reminded the girls in the family, "You must study hard. You must pass the university entrance exam." But I believed Ms. Yang's stubbornness ran even deeper than Grandma's, because within it lay the unfinished dream of her own life. She once told me something surprising. She said she was jealous of me. She was the first adult who had ever been jealous of me, not like the other children who envied me because my family had a grocery shop. She said, "You're very lucky, Evelyn. You met a grandmother like yours who wholeheartedly cares for you. So you must treasure her. When you get into university in the future, find a good job and earn money. Make sure you treat your grandma well." At that moment, I nodded so hard that words could no longer express my determination. "Grandma, do you see? Because of you, I have become someone that others envy. All these years, I had envied other children for having parents who cared for them, and now, finally, someone was envying me. I attended middle school at a place very far from home. Our house lay deep in a valley, while the school was located on the top of a mountain. Walking there took more than 2 hours. The mountains of the Lust Plateau rose layer upon layer, towering so high they made people feel overwhelmed. Beside the narrow path was a steep cliff. We completed countless homework assignments. We walked countless miles, all just to cross those endless mountains, to carry the fate of our families on our shoulders, simply hoping that our loved ones could live a slightly better life. Grandma was always especially thoughtful. She made several pairs of thick-soled cloth shoes for me, afraid that my feet would hurt from walking the mountain roads. In summer, it wasn't too bad. On the mountain slopes, there were small peach orchards. Pink and white blossoms bloomed across the yellow earth under the blue sky. The folk songs of old shepherds echoed through the valleys. The only frightening times were during heavy rain. The narrow paths would turn muddy and dangerous. No one dared to walk them. We had to take a detour that added another half-hour to the journey home. And if I returned home late at night, I wouldn't be able to help Grandma with the work anymore. The hardest time was winter. The temperature often dropped below -20 degrees. The ground froze as hard as a sheet of ice on a lake, cold and nearly impossible to walk on. Then one day, in the 12th lunar month, heavy snow was falling. I was hurrying home. When I reached a slope, I couldn't stop myself in time. I slid down into a creek, and injured my arm. Grandma was so frightened that she no longer dared to let me walk home from school every day. She said she would let me stay in the school dormitory instead. I didn't want to waste the money, but by the time I reached 8th grade, she had quietly saved up enough so I could live in the dormitory. After paying the dormitory fee to the homeroom teacher, Mr. Carter, I walked Grandma to the school gate. There were still afternoon classes, so I didn't dare go too far. I leaned against the gate. The September sky was clear and bright. I watched Grandma walking away, weaving between several elm trees. Their shadows fell in scattered patches across the ground, speckling her completely white hair. We completed countless homework assignments. We walked countless miles, all just to cross those endless mountains, to carry the fate of our families on our shoulders, simply hoping that our loved ones could live a slightly better life. Grandma was always especially thoughtful. She made several pairs of thick-soled cloth shoes for me, afraid that my feet would hurt from walking the mountain roads. In summer, it wasn't too bad. On the mountain slopes, there were small peach orchards. Pink and white blossoms bloomed across the yellow earth under the blue sky. The folk songs of old shepherds echoed through the valleys. The only frightening times were during heavy rain. the narrow paths would turn muddy and dangerous. No one dared to walk them. We had to take a detour that added another half-hour to the journey home, and if I returned home late at night, I wouldn't be able to help Grandma with the work anymore. The hardest time was winter. The temperature often dropped below -20 degrees. The ground froze as hard as a sheet of ice on a lake, cold and nearly impossible to walk on. Then one day, in the 12th lunar month, heavy snow was falling. I was hurrying home. When I reached a slope, I couldn't stop myself in time. I slid down into a creek, and injured my arm. Grandma was so frightened that she no longer dared to let me walk home from school every day. She said she would let me stay in the school dormitory instead. I didn't want to waste the money, but by the time I reached 8th grade, she had quietly saved up enough so I could live in the dormitory. After paying the dormitory fee to the homeroom teacher, Mr. Carter, I walked Grandma to the school gate. There were still afternoon classes, so I didn't dare go too far. I leaned against the gate. The September sky was clear and bright. I watched Grandma walking away, weaving between several elm trees. Their shadows fell in scattered patches across the ground, speckling her completely white hair. When I was in middle school, my father, Victor Lin, came back to visit twice. The first time, he proudly told us he had bought a house in the city. The second time, he drove up in a newly purchased car. Hanging from the steering wheel was a photo. It was a picture of him and Serena Chin. He had a new family now. A house. A car, right in front of me, he said to Grandma Lin. Now all that's missing is a grandson for Mom to hold. Grandma suddenly flung the tea in her cup onto his feet. That was the first time I had ever seen her angry. If it weren't for Evelyn being here with me these past years, I'd probably have died here already, and no one would have cared. She snapped. And what good is having a son, huh? A son to take care of you in old age? Just look at you and you'll know. That day, Victor Lin stormed off angrily. I silently cleaned up the house. When I looked up, I saw Grandma sitting alone on the bed. In her hands she held an old photograph of my father as a child. Her expression was blank, distant. Later on, she told me about her past. She too had been forced into marriage by her family when she was just a teenager. My grandfather, Arthur Lin, had always been weak and often bedridden. Meanwhile, Victor's grandparents did nothing all day. The whole family depended on Grandma alone to keep everything running. Grandfather Arthur Lin died early because of illness. But there were still brief periods when his health improved. It was during one of those times that Victor Lin was born. Because he was the only child, and a son, the entire family spoiled him terribly. How terribly? Once, my grandfather beat Grandma until she was covered in blood. And her mother-in-law even encouraged it. She told my father, in the future, don't marry a woman like this. All because Grandma had asked one extra question. It happened during the new year. Grandma had given Arthur Lin some money to buy household supplies. Instead, he took all the money and gambled it away. When he came back, Grandma only asked, "You knew there was no money left in the house. If you gambled it all away, how are we supposed to live?" For that single question, she was beaten, and my father, Victor Lin, listened to his parents and grandparents. He never once defended his own mother. That was when I finally understood. How could someone as good as Grandma Lin have a son like that? She had already done everything she could. But in such circumstances, she had been completely powerless. A frayed rope always snaps at its weakest point, and misfortune always finds those who suffer the most. So when I was admitted to the city's top high school, Grandma cried. I could tell that deep down. She wanted to smile happily for me, but too much pain had flooded her heart at that moment. Perhaps she felt that in her entire life, where she believed she had accomplished nothing, she had finally done one thing right. I stepped forward and hugged her tightly. I wanted her to know she was the best grandmother in the world. She was a rare and truly good person. She knew how to do so many things. She had done so many things well. She had never bowed her head to life. She had clearly given me a new life. Yet she had never once burdened me with any moral debt. Her humility went beyond words. Her sense of guilt broke my heart. "Grandma," I said softly, "I'll study hard in high school. I will definitely get into a good university. In the future," I told her, "I'll be like Dad. I'll buy a house and a car in the city. When that time comes, I'll drive you around everywhere." At that moment, I believed it completely. I thought everything would come true, and in reality, it did. Later, I was admitted to a 985 university, ranking third in the entire city. From there, I continued straight through my master's and doctoral programs at the same university. After graduating, I secured a good job. Within just a few years, I had everything one could ask for in terms of material comfort. But by the time I drove my car back to the little house where Grandma and I used to live, the only thing I could take with me was an old black and white photograph. Grandma had endured the hardest days of her life, yet she couldn't hold on for even one more day. After I started high school, I managed to obtain both a financial aid grant and academic scholarships thanks to my excellent grades. They were enough to cover my living expenses. With my persistent persuasion, Grandma finally agreed to reduce the amount of farmland she worked, but she insisted on saying that later I would still need to go to university. "I've heard that college students need 1,500 yuan a month for living expenses," she said. "I'll save money for you according to that amount." Hearing her say that, I laughed and gently massaged her shoulders. "Grandma, I don't need that much," I said. "Besides, by then I'll already be an adult. I can work part-time and earn my own money. With scholarships and financial aid, I definitely won't need to ask you for living expenses." But she stubbornly shook her head. "A girl can't be raised in hardship," she said firmly. "If there's anything you like, just use Grandma's money to buy it. I don't want anyone looking down on you in the future. Especially those boys who spend a little money and then think they can become your boyfriend." I understood what she meant. Deep down, I knew that from the bottom of her heart, she only wanted the very best for me, so I simply nodded obediently. Unexpectedly, at that moment she suddenly paused. She let out a soft sigh, then gently took my hand, lowering her head. Her white hair looked like a spider's web, threads of hardship woven through the life that should have been filled with happiness. "My Tin Tin probably isn't easy to deceive," she murmured. "Because our family is poor, Tin Tin had to grow up sensible very early. Very early." Her voice choked. "That you had to grow up too soon." Grandma was crying. I couldn't bear to see it. My own tears burst out like rain. I hugged her tightly. "Grandma, I don't blame you," I said through my tears. "I really don't blame you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have the life I have today. I wouldn't even have survived until now." That day, Grandma and I held each other and cried bitterly. There was relief in those tears, but also deep sorrow. Yet if crying once could solve everything, then this world would not hold so many grievances and regrets. The man who later became my husband was my high school classmate, Daniel Wu. But we didn't fall in love early. His family was also from the countryside, though their conditions were much better than mine. He never looked down on me. On the contrary, when we sat at the same desk and I told him about my life, he only grew more sympathetic and more respectful toward me. There was one thing we promised each other. "I'm telling you about my past, I said to him, not because I want your pity. And I also don't want you to say later, if I disappoint you somehow, that you don't blame me. Daniel remembered that sentence for a very long time. Later, even when we argued so fiercely that we were on the verge of divorce, he never once said, "You were raised by your grandmother without parents around. No wonder your personality is so stubborn." Because of that, even though we stumbled along the way, we still held hands and walked through our whole lives together. Later, Daniel and I had a daughter. I named her Mia Wu. To me, her name meant the bright hope that Grandma had once given to me. Mia's eyes looked very much like Grandma's. Later on, I told my husband that I believed Mia was Grandma reborn. I would definitely raise Mia well, just the way Grandma had raised me. Grandma had given me a good life, even a happy life. In 12th grade, I was so busy that I hardly had a single moment of rest. The teachers in the city were experienced. They told us stories about Beijing and Shanghai, about Tsinghua University, Peking University, Tongji University, and Fudan University. During the last winter break of my senior year, I met Miss Daisy Yang again. She was still as gentle as before, but I thought to myself that my own mother, Linda Zhao, probably never possessed such tenderness. Ms. Yang also told me that with my current grades and condition, as long as I maintained it, I would definitely be able to enter a good university in a big city. From that moment until the end of the college entrance examination, I never went home again. All I thought about was studying with all my strength, mastering every piece of knowledge I could. Because of that, I never noticed that in just those 6 months, Grandma's health had deteriorated rapidly, yet she stubbornly continued farming the entire 2 acres of land. She even raised 5 sheep. She said she had to save enough money for me to go to university. She said she had to make sure I would have 1,500 yuan every month. How much she had worked, how much she had carried on her shoulders, and how exhausted she had become. When people finally discovered her, she had already collapsed under the scorching noon sun in the middle of the potato field. That day was the second day of my college entrance examination. I only learned about it much later. When I walked into the examination room that afternoon, the neighbors had already taken Grandma to the hospital, but she refused to listen to the doctors. No matter what they said, she wouldn't stay in the hospital. She refused to spend money on treatment. She even forbade anyone from telling me. Later, an older relative told me what she had said. "No matter what happens to me, I can endure it," Grandma had said. "I'll wait until Tin Tin gets into university. Once she leaves for school and goes far away, then I'll allow myself to die." In the end, she only accepted a single injection, something that neither hurt nor itched. She treated it as if she had already received medical care. That very day, she went back home and continued working. After I returned home, Grandma cooked delicious meals for me every day. She waited with me as I received my exam results, filled out my university applications, and confirmed my admission. Then we waited together for the admission letter to arrive. Grandma even killed the only rooster we had with her own hands, stewing it into soup and cooking delicious dishes for me. Until the next morning, when I woke up, I didn't hear the rooster crowing anymore. At first, I simply felt a vague sense of unease. Then I realized I couldn't hear Grandma breathing either. In that instant, my head began to buzz. My arms and legs went numb, and I couldn't move for a long time. I kept calling out to her, "Grandma. Grandma." I wanted to shake her awake, but I was afraid of using too much strength. I only dared to gently shake her arm. But even when the uncles from the village, Uncle Zhao, Uncle Lu, Uncle Wang, lifted her onto a car to take her to the hospital, she never responded to me. She didn't say a single word, not the words she whispered into my ear every morning. "Tin Tin, are you awake yet? I warmed up a steamed bun for you. Put a little lard on it before you eat. I've boiled some hot water. When you wake up, wash your face. I got you a pack of spicy sticks from the grocery shop. They just arrived a few days ago. Tin Tin, eat yours first before I sell them to anyone else, or they'll all be gone. All of it was gone, and the promise she made the night before, that when my university admission letter arrived, she would cook dumplings for me, that was gone too. It was the month I had just stepped into adulthood, the month when I was finally about to change her life. And yet, she left me forever. Grandma didn't leave behind any trace of herself. Only the hospital's diagnosis report remained, lines and lines of causes, heart problems, brain issues, failing internal organs, damage to her limbs. The doctor looked at me in astonishment. Did your grandmother usually complain about pain anywhere? No, she never complained. She truly never did. In the spring, she had even driven the 2 cows to plow the fields by herself. The pain she must have endured had to be unbearable. Yet Miss Daisy Young once told me that when she passed by our house, she often heard Grandma singing old Peking opera tunes and those bold, heroic songs from long ago. That elderly woman, with her weathered, purplish face, with hands rough and hardened like stone, never once uttered a single word of pain. Even in death, a gentle smile still rested on her face. Many people, like me, simply couldn't believe it. They said, she looked so healthy usually. How could she suddenly pass away like this? It felt unbelievable. Even I had to search my memories for a long time before I could remember the last words she ever said to me. That night, the moonlight in the countryside was bright and clear, shining through the window. Even though the lamp had been turned off, the room was still filled with light. Grandma turned over, her face toward me. Even without looking at her, I knew how sweetly she must have been smiling. She asked softly, "Tin Tin, you're only using that thin blanket. Aren't you cold?" "I am a little," I answered. So she pulled her blanket over and laid it on top of mine. "Are you cold? Are you hungry?" She only spoke those few simple sentences. For more than 10 years, those were the only kinds of words she ever said. And yet those simple words carried all the warmth of my childhood. They guided me as I grew up. They guided me until I became a careful, devoted mother, just like her. Then suddenly, Grandma took out a small cloth pouch from beneath her pillow. It was clearly hand-sewn by her. She slipped it under my pillow. "Tin Tin, this is a little pocket money," she said. "Take it and buy something good to eat. Remember to eat more meat." Inside was a thick stack of small bills, but altogether, it only added up to 50 yuan. Before that, she had already given me a bankbook containing 20,000 yuan. She said all of it was for my education. It even included the money my father, Victor Lin, had left behind years ago. She had truly meant what she said. She had done exactly as she promised. But I never imagined that she had only left 50 yuan for her own living expenses. No, what she had left herself was a body full of illness. Her only worry was that she might die before I left for university. She was afraid I would be heartbroken. By the time my father heard the news and rushed back, Grandma had already been buried. As the last remaining member listed in our household registration, I handled the funeral arrangements for Grandma with the help of the villagers. When Victor Lin arrived, he cried bitterly. He handed out countless cigarettes to the villagers who stayed overnight to keep vigil. He knelt beside me and said, "Tin Tin, I heard you got into a university in Beijing." I truly never expected that, on the very days when Grandma had just passed away, inside her mourning hall, he would actually dare to bring up taking me away. If he had said something like that 10 years ago, it would already have been too late, let alone now. I gave a cold smile. What's the matter?" I asked. "Do you want your son to have an older sister studying in Beijing?" In that moment, his expression became strange. The fake crying in his voice disappeared. He rubbed his half-bald head awkwardly and forced a stiff smile. "Your Aunt Chen." "Serena Chen. Her health isn't very good," he said. "She hasn't been able to get pregnant for a long time." "Dad, that was the last time I ever called him that." "You deserve it," I said coldly. "You deserve not to have anyone to carry on your family line." His eyes widened in anger. Instinctively, he raised his hand as if to slap me, but immediately, I pointed at Grandma's memorial portrait, tears filling my eyes. Right in front of her picture, I demanded, "Do you really dare to bring that slap down? You didn't take care of your own mother. You abandoned your own daughter. And now you actually dare to say you want to take me back so I can take care of you in your old age?" I knew very well that morality could not restrain a person like him, but in the morning hall, there were many villagers present. They all heard my words, and public shame was enough to stop him from using violence. Once again, he hurriedly left, saying he would find another time to talk to me. I later learned that he had already discussed with the village officials about transferring my household registration, but by then, I had already reached adulthood. I firmly refused to move my registration away from my home, because to me, it didn't matter whether it was a rural registration or an urban one. Other than Grandma's house, I had no other home. This place was my home, this small village, this little house. Whenever I filled out forms or registered my information anywhere, I proudly wrote down this address. The person I loved most was resting here. If I didn't stay here, then when Grandma's soul returned, she wouldn't even be able to find her home. After I drove my father away, my mother also came to disturb me. She had already given birth to a son. Her husband's family was wealthy. Once they had enough to eat and live comfortably, they began looking for ways to decorate their reputation. Perhaps she truly wanted her son to have an older sister who studied in Beijing. Maybe she even hoped I would tutor him for free. Or perhaps she was simply waiting until I became successful so I could help her son in the future. It certainly wasn't because she felt any regret. So when I heard she had come, I grabbed the wooden stick used for burning funeral paper offerings and rushed outside. In 16 years, this was the first time I had seen my biological mother again. In my memories, she had been a gentle and elegant woman, much like Ms. Daisy Young. But at that moment, wearing high heels and heavy makeup, I barely recognized her. Her expression was sharp and sour. Perhaps the old saying was true, one's heart eventually shapes one's face. As I swung the burning stick toward her, both my arms trembled violently. I shouted, "If you dare step into Grandma's morning hall, I'll take your life." She turned pale, then she said to me softly, "Tin Tin. It's Mom. Don't you recognize me? I don't have a mother." I cried. At that moment, I broke down into uncontrollable sobs. One of the uncles quickly took the stick from my hands. Ms. Daisy Young hurried forward and pulled me into her arms. I screamed in despair, "Ask anyone here. Does anyone even know that I still have parents? I only have my grandma." I couldn't see clearly whether my mother was crying, but I heard her trembling voice. "Tin Tin, back then, your mother had no choice either. Can you forgive me?" I tried very hard to calm myself. After a long time, I finally answered, "I will never forgive you." "If I say I forgive you, then does that mean everything Grandma and I went through was deserved?" After saying that, I cried until darkness swam before my eyes and I collapsed to my knees in the morning hall. Perhaps everyone pitied me. They helped drive her away. Later, my father, Victor Lin, tried to meet me a few more times. But my mother, I never saw her again. After all, the choices they made back then had already completely severed every connection with me. But the pain I carried, I would never be able to let it go for the rest of my life. It would forever remain a deep scar in my life. Grandma had healed me, but the scar she left behind would never disappear. So I would never reconcile. The only path left for me was to carry my longing for her and live the precious life that she had exchanged with her own life. I never once used the savings passbook Grandma gave me. It seemed as though the printed lines on it had stopped on the day she made her final deposit. Somehow, it made me feel as if there was still a chance, as if she might come one day and withdraw the money herself. Later, I cleaned and repaired the old house in the countryside. The houses there were built from yellow earth. They looked old, but they were incredibly sturdy, because inside those walls lived not only craftsmanship, but also Grandma's heart and dedication. The careful details, the solid workmanship, and the smile on her face when she finished building the little study room for me, I would never forget it. Tin Tin, she had said proudly, the house Grandma built for you, live in it without worry. It won't collapse even in 100 years. I completely believed her. Just like that house, the strength she left in my life would never fade. Later on, I brought my daughter Mia Wu back to the village many times, back to the house that held my entire childhood. I took her to visit Grandma's grave. I taught her to say, "Great Grandma, I'm Mimi. I came back with Mommy to visit you." I gently stroked Mimi's head, just like the way Grandma had once loved and cared for me. "Grandma," I whispered in my heart, "can you see it? Today, I've finally become someone who can protect others. Once, I was just a child who had nothing, a child abandoned by both parents. But in the end, I built a family of my own." I watched Mimi playing innocently in the dirt beside Grandma's grave, and at that moment, a sudden pain stabbed through my chest so sharply that I had to turn away quickly to hide the tears streaming down my face. "Grandma, did you know, in my very first semester of university, I worked part-time and earned the first money of my life. But the truth is, during all the years when you were still alive, I never once thought of myself as an adult. I would keep candy in my mouth, a few packs of spicy sticks in my pocket. From far away, when I saw the thin blue smoke rising from the chimney of our house, I always felt that I was still a child who needed to go home, a child who needed to cling to Grandma. I only truly grew up after you left me. Your departure forced me to grow up. I had no way left not to grow up anymore." I lay on the bed, covering myself with the thick cotton coat that you used to wear. The coat was cold. It could not ask me anymore, "Tin Tin, are you cold? Are you hungry? Grandma, why couldn't you stay with me just a little longer? Grandma, why was I so powerless, unable to make you stay with me even a little longer?" Mimi noticed something was wrong with me. She stood up and held my hand. I quickly wiped away my tears. Another bitter winter had arrived, just like the day when Grandma once walked more than 2 hours to pick me up and bring me home. I asked Mia Wu, "Do you want to keep going?" I wanted to take her for a longer walk. "I can walk," Mimi said. "I'll walk with Mommy." When we climbed to the top of the hill, Mimi suddenly exclaimed with innocent surprise, "Mommy, this place is actually so small." From the hilltop, looking down at the valley, it really was tiny, no bigger than the palm of a hand. My grandmother's entire life had rested quietly within this small palm of land. Mimi looked around again and said, "Mommy, why is everything here so yellow and barren?" I asked her softly, "Do you like coming here?" Mimi was only 6 years old, but somehow, I felt that there was something deeply meaningful in her answer. She nodded slowly and said, "Because this is Mommy's home." Yes, this is my home, in this remote little valley, in the dry and rugged land of the Northwest. This was the place that Grandma Lin, Margaret Lynn, and I once called home. The Northwest may be barren and harsh, but even in that harsh land, there will always be strong people, people who bloom like flowers that refuse to bow their heads. The end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to Love Stories with Lisa for more stories. Thank you so much.